Ron Deutsch is the Executive Director for New Yorkers for Fiscal Fairness. And across the table, we have Frank Mauro. He is the Executive Director of the Fiscal Policy Institute. Gentlemen, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we should say that, and we were speaking about this before, I think it's only fair, the governor has vetoed $193 million worth of what we know as member items, and I would call pork, but we will discuss that in a few.
I hope so.
And so that's old money, actually, reappropriated funds from the last budget. Now we also have a budget that is almost done, someday, one of these days will be done, that has no member items. So you guys are going to, actually, your universe of people are being hit twice. These nonprofits are not receiving money in this current budget, nor money from the last budget.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that the first point I want to make, and what the press has done to a large degree, is
It's
done
all
a
our fault.
disservice. It's always your fault.
I know.
But in reality, what's happened is we label these programs pork, right? These member items, legislative initiatives, that legislators direct these funds towards programs and services in their legislative districts that they feel are important and are providing critical services in their community. So you can label that pork if you like, but I would say that those programs are not pork. In fact, they are critically important in the district and have a lot of value. So right now we call these programs pork, but what they've done, in fact, is cut programs and services that were already contractually obligated to be provided. Nonprofits entered into contracts with the state in good faith, thinking that they were going to get this money to provide these services. And now they're having the rug pulled out from underneath them. So it's really unfortunate, and we're hoping that there's some way that we can get around this and negate the harmful impact of these cuts.
Well, actually, and Frank, you can speak to this.
Okay.
There are certain. It's not. We're not talking about an enormous amount of money. I mean, when I say $193 million in a $130 billion budget, that's. But for these nonprofits, it's actually $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 for some of the smaller ones. Is a significant amount of money, actually, and that money goes a long way.
Right. I think that it's important in two ways. They provide services. A lot of the human services that the state provides, it's provided through nonprofits. So a lot of the programs for senior citizens, a lot of the youth programs are provided through these nonprofit social services agencies. So it's not good for the people of New York in bad times to lose these support services, but it's also not good for the economy. And I don't think the governor would be vetoing these kinds of appropriations if he was doing an economic impact of the choices. In other words, cutting funding in a sector like this hits very low-income workers. The nonprofit human service sector in the state employs about 280,000 people, and the average salary is only $25,000 a year. So if there's downsizing in an industry like this, you're going to lose almost dollar for dollar in the economy, because people living at these income levels have to spend everything they earn to live.
Okay, so here's the problem, though, and you're actually right, and I give you a little bit of grief about it, but the media certainly focuses on sort of the seedier aspect, if you will, of the member item problem, which is we focus on, let's see, organizations that get funds that legislators have their girlfriends or their mom or their whoever, their aides are on the board. Or they're actually bilking. I mean, you know, this is what has been accused, Pedro Espada has been accused of by the Attorney General's office, gets state contracts for state cash and then uses that money to benefit himself, which he says is not true. So what in the system could be done better to put in safeguards so these kind of things that then the media focuses on would not be happening?
Well, when I worked at the legislature, and it was a long time ago, I was Secretary of the Ways and Means Committee for Stanley Fink, who was Speaker. And one of the things he insisted on after a small state agency brought it to his attention is that state agencies need the resources to review these contracts. And so one of the things that Stanley Fink did for the 3 or 4 years after he started doing this, that he was Speaker, is for every agency that got member items to administer, they also got, in some proportion to the number of contracts they had to administer, staffing money so they could do due diligence. Because he said they didn't want to hear that the agencies were just letting these things go however they went just because they didn't want to spend the time because they were legislative initiatives. So Stanley Fink's position was you have to be as rigorous in administering these as you are in anything, and we're going to not put you at a position where you have to hurt other things you're doing. We're going to give you staffing money for this.
So here's the problem, and I think, Ron, you and I have talked about this before on the show, which is this becomes a political football. Okay, and this is the way, these member items, or whatever you want to call them, is the way that leadership controls rank and file. One of the ways, you know, they control them through stipends, and they control, which we call Lulus in Albany, but they control them. They say, okay, and the governor then subsequently controls the legislature by taking this money back. I mean, there are pots of money that are largely unregulated. The leadership, which is Shelley Silver and John Sampson in the Senate, get to say, you will get 10,000 and you will get 100,000 and you in marginal district, et cetera, will get more because we need those constituents to be happier. I mean, it's a political game.
Right.
You've argued, I think, that this would actually be better if perhaps we lined out these items in the budget overall. What about the idea of getting rid of member items? And how do you feel about that?
I don't have a problem with getting rid of member items. I think the process, the way it's designed right now, is not the most ideal process. It lacks transparency. Sometimes, in many years, they've lumped them all together so that they weren't lined out in the budget, so we didn't know how they were spending this money. But I think moving forward, you know, we have to check each individual member item. Does it pass the smell test? Should it be included in the overall budget rather than having this kind of piecemeal approach? But I think we also have to keep in mind the fact that legislators are close to programs in their district. They do have a better idea of how effective these programs can be in their district. So I think they're a good arbiter of whether or not these programs are worth state funding or not. So, you know, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So we got to figure out, is there a better process by which we can distribute these member items, and is there a way we can make it more transparent and accountable to the public?
But hasn't Andrew Cuomo, as the Attorney General, instituted, I mean, he was going over member items supposedly with the fine-tooth comb, instituting more, and I know at New York City level they've also done this, instituted because of the slush fund scandal, is what we call it down there. But here, you know, they instituted some protections to try and make it more rigorous, and then the controller has to sign off on it. I mean, what more do you need?
Well, I think that that's a very important point, because they get into the budget from the legislature, but once a member item is in an agency's budget, the agency should administer that contract with the same diligence as any other contract. They shouldn't cut slack for the recipient. They should make sure that the services are being provided. And you're correct that the controller has to pass on all contracts.
Well, under a certain amount of money, right? I mean, a $10,000 contract,
right.
that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
Because the resources, as you were saying, required to vet every single contract is just, it's too onerous. It just can't be done.
Well, you know, I think that you know, it doesn't make sense not to exercise due diligence either. So I don't think the answer should be to not fund small nonprofits, to only fund big ones. I don't think that would be a good answer. I think a lot of the aging programs, a lot of the youth programs are delivered by small agencies frequently and by big agencies frequently, and they both play an important part in the sector.
Okay, so where are we now? I mean, here's the problem also.